Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
And a happy Thursday to you from a pretty rain-soaked Atlanta. I'm Ron Roberts. Thank you for listening to The Ron Show, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. So, President Joe Biden made his address last night, stated his reasons, sort of, for deciding not to remain atop the ticket for the Democratic Party's nomination to be President of the United States. He may have left some questions on the table, and we'll discuss how you, as I did, scan across cable television, whether it was on CNN. I did watch the Fox News response and MSNBC as well, just to kind of get a general idea of how it was received from not just all three networks, but of course each of those networks having varying political points of view. And first things first, though, let's do this. If you didn't get a chance to watch the address, I'm going to give you a chance to hear President Joe Biden as he addressed the nation last night from the Oval Office with his family watching alongside.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. In this sacred space, I'm surrounded by portraits of extraordinary American presidents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think is more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that. And I never have. I've made it clear that I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. America's going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe I know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people. And I know this. We are a great nation because we are good people. When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth. And the truth, the sacred cause of this country, is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause, cherish it so much, a cause of American democracy itself, must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy, I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose. I'll keep calling out hate and extremism. Make it clear there is no place in America for political violence or any violence ever, period. I'm going to keep speaking out to protect our kids from gun violence, our planet from climate crisis that is the existential threat. And I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot so we can end cancer as we know it, because we can do it. And I'm going to call for Supreme Court reform, because this is critical to our democracy, Supreme Court reform. You know, I will keep working to ensure America remains strong and secure and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world. You know, we've come so far since my inauguration. On that day, I told you, as I stood in that winter, we stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities. Peril and possibilities. We were in the grip of the worst pandemic in the century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. But we came together as Americans, and we got through it. We emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Today we have the strongest economy in the world, creating nearly 16 million new jobs, a record. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in 20 years. We're literally rebuilding our entire nation, urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities. Manufacturing has come back to America. We're leading the world again in chips and science and innovation. We finally beat Big Pharma after all these years to lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we lower the cost for everyone, not just seniors. More people have health care today in America than ever before. And I signed one of the most significant laws helping millions of veterans and their families who are exposed to toxic materials. You know, most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office. I've kept my commitment to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I also kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and be a president for all Americans. That's what I've done. I ran for president 4 years ago because I believed and still do that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake. And that's still the case. America's an idea. An idea stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It's the most powerful idea in the history of the world. That idea is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've never fully lived up to it, to this sacred idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I do not believe the American people will walk away from it now. In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I'd like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people. When you make that choice, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin that's hanging on my wall here in the Oval Office, alongside the busts of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Cesar Chavez. When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders had given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. Nowhere else on earth could a kid with a stutter from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. But here I am. That's what's so special about America. We're a nation of promise and possibilities, of dreamers and doers, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. I've given my heart and my soul to our nation, like so many others. I've been blessed a million times in return with the love and support of the American people. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith, and remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
That is President Joseph R. Biden addressing the nation last night from the Oval Office behind the Resolute desk, as he mentioned before. What we didn't know as we watched and found out later and saw a lot of photography released after the fact, his family right there alongside, his son, Hunter, daughter Ashley, his wife, Dr. Jill, all sitting alongside, watching with, holding each other's hands and being there to throw their full and moral and familial support behind the president. As he said, words like Americans are going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? He never once uttered Donald Trump's name. But with those words, he didn't have to. Forward or backward, hope and hate, unity and division, honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, democracy. The statement really couldn't have been more clear, but still an eloquently written speech, and even on delivery for a man who has battled a stutter all of his life, and as his age has caught up with him, eyesight and ability to stay on focus with a script or a teleprompter, gave it an A- delivery, in my opinion. So you're saying, Ron, what could he have done better? Well, again, obviously, knowing the challenges that he deals with. And listen, I'm 50 years old, and I've had questionable vision all my life. Reading from a teleprompter is not something that I'm very good at. And working in residential real estate, there are times where I have to craft videos for my social media, and I don't script anything anymore. I full-on memorize as much as I can so that I don't have to be staring at a prompter that's also recording my face and look like I'm squinting. Again, I see that all the time. Those are little cues that I see in President Biden when he's giving a speech. I can tell, no, he's not angry. He's struggling to read. And he's a man who's 81 years old and doesn't wear glasses. Does he wear contacts? I don't know. But that's just a little insight into that. No, as far as style goes, I thought stylistically he gave a very strong speech. I think personally and selfishly, I would have liked to have seen him get a little emotional. But that's just me. I was emotional. I'm watching this and knowing the full story, the heart and soul that this man has put into serving this nation since the age of 29, and all that he's sacrificed personally, the loss that he has felt early on in his adult life, later in his more senior years here in the last 10 years, losing his beloved son Bo, knowing what he's having to deal with in aiding his son struggling with addiction and addiction recovery, Hunter Biden, and the destructive behavior that he had obviously exhibited over the last few years. Knowing that 2016 was not to be his time because of the recency of the passing of his son, Bo, and being strongly encouraged not to run by his friend, obviously, and ticket mate, Barack Obama. Deciding later in life that he was the one singular individual who would take down Donald Trump, and it being that important that he stepped forward and do so that late in his life. Yes, a lot of sacrifice, and even believing, perhaps selfishly, perhaps not sure, that he is still the singular one individual who can keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, and the importance of that, and coming to terms with the reality that he did not want to hear from friends, allies, confidants, even those I'm sure in his inner circle who eventually came to the conclusion at some point over the weekend that, Mr. President, it's just not going to happen this time, and here's the other way to make this happen. Had to be a bitter pill for him to swallow, and yet he has done so. And while we've heard whispers behind the scenes about, the anger or the frustration that he may have shown viscerally around those in his inner circle, last night he addressed the American people without shedding a tear, without showing, I think, any emotion other than being stoic. And you can't help but appreciate that as well, I suppose. More thoughts and comments on this. Got to take a quick break. The Ron Show on the America One Radio app. You can follow The Ron Show, by the way, on your preferred social media platforms. If you follow me on Facebook, you'll get the show notes every time once I post a podcast at Ron Show ATL on Facebook, Twitter X platform, Threads, Instagram. RonShowATL.com, by the way, the website, if you ever want to catch the show notes. That's where I throw all the citations from everything that I cite and discuss article-wise, et cetera, and so on. It's just an easy way for you to go back and say, well, what was this guy talking about? I do that because I'm going to tell you something. It's frustrating when I'm listening to something or I'm watching something and I don't get citations or I have to go and find things on my own. It's fine. It's fine. It is what it is. Van Jones last night on CNN after President Biden's speech.
He asked the question, does character still matter? Well, it does tonight. It does tonight. The kid with the stutter did good. He did good. That's a good man. He fell on the sword. He fell on the sword. Most heroes, they fight till the bitter end. He fell on this sword. He's an old guy, but the heart's still there. The words aren't as clear, but the love is as clear. The heart is still there. I think people need to look at this because you had somebody sitting in that chair and he wouldn't give up power no matter what. Wouldn't give up power, let there be an insurrection, wouldn't get out of that chair. Even when the people voted for you to get out the chair, he wouldn't get out the chair. And you got somebody who's sitting in that same chair showing that character does matter, showing that you can have grace, you can put the people first, you can pass the baton, and you're a bigger person for it. You're going to be more loved for it. So you've got two examples now of what men with power do and how they act at the end. And you couldn't act any better than Joe Biden. That kid with the stutter grew up. He did a great job for this country, and he's doing a great job tonight. And I love that man.
The more I think about this, the more I think that this exit is a brilliant stroke. In fact, I was messaging a friend of mine last night. My friend Daryl and I, we talk politics all the time. Thanks for listening, Daryl. I actually wouldn't be shocked at all if you start seeing approval ratings for the current president, Joe Biden, to start going up. This was a masterstroke. Again, I give him an A minus, and the only reason I give him an A minus is because I selfishly would have liked to have seen him maybe get a little emotional, maybe get a little choked up, maybe get a little weepy in the eyes. And he didn't do it. He chose to be stoic. And I say chose. Maybe that's just not how he is. I don't understand how he pulled that off, if I'm being honest, because it's hard. It's hard to be told, Grandpa, it's time to take the keys. And it's time to realize that you're in the sunset, not just obviously of his life, not in his case. We don't know how long Joe Biden's going to keep going, but in the sunset of your political life, and knowing that you've given all you can and that so much is at stake and you really want to fight that good fight one more time, but that it's time to let the next generation take the reins. Had to be tough. He didn't show any emotion. He was very stoic, and I commend him for it. I don't know how he did it. Do not know how he did it. Meanwhile, a czar is born. We'll discuss when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
Obviously, I had my way of seeing President Joe Biden's address to the American public last night, and my thoughts on it, and then Sean Hannity had his.
Joe Biden finally explained his decision in a very short 12-minute speech, mumbling, bumbling, stumbling, fumbling, frankly, to the American people, one that clearly showed his cognitive decline that was covered up by those around him and the state-run media mob. Wow. It was on full display, basically an average day.
All class, Sean Hannity. Meanwhile, speaking of stumbling and fumbling and bumbling, last night's giving a speech. Can you call it a speech when he completely goes off prompter? It's not really a speech anymore, is it? It's just yammering. He had trouble saying the word abortion last night.
Also a total radical on a word called, do you know this, right?
No, good catch.
A word called what? Abortion.
Good job. He finally got it out. In between rants, again, about Hannibal Lecter. Why are we still doing that? Why is he still doing that?
Insane asylums. You know, they go crazy when I say the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Okay, they say, why would he mention Hannibal Lecter? He must be cognitively in trouble. No, these are real stories.
By the way, speaking of cognitive tests, weren't we all about getting cognitive tests for our presidential? We should do that. We should definitely press for the cognitive tests now. Let's take the two presumptive nominees, one of whom is the actual nominee, the other the presumptive nominee. Let's take these two nominees now of both the major parties, and we should have cognitive tests done. That's a great idea. They suggested that, right? That he suggested we should definitely do that. Speaking of folks on the right, just not really seeing things from a lens of reality, I have frankly become somewhat fascinated with Scott Jennings now on CNN. Scott Jennings is the de facto right-wing voice for CNN when they put together a panel, and God bless him. I mean, he and those on the right have been so concerned about the 14 million Democratic primary voters who voted for Joe Biden. Also, he of the Biden-Harris ticket, Harris attached to that as well, you know. I mean, this thought process, like, did we not think when we were voting for the 81-year-old Joe Biden that there is maybe the chance he just doesn't finish the second term? Yeah, we knew it was a package deal. Thank you. No, thank you. Anyway, David Axelrod pushing back a little bit on that grievance from the right here of late.
I agree that votes matter. And in this case, nobody voted for this.
Scott, have you seen the polling, though? Like 80% of Democrats, maybe more, approved of his decision to step down. The overwhelming majority of people in the country. What the Republicans are saying is, he's yours, you own him, and we can beat him, so we want him to stay, and we'll tell this fairy tale about our, newfound concern about democracy, and we're going to fight for those 14 million Democrats.
Yes.
80 million people voted for Joe Biden in 2020.
81 million.
And I didn't hear these same Republicans standing up for their
I mean,
Right.
didn't you want him to step down after that debate? I mean, didn't all the Republicans want him to step down?
I certainly questioned his ability.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Anderson Cooper, I think, for jumping in there as well. Yes, absolutely. Didn't you want him to step down? Haven't you been saying he should step down? What they wanted was for 25th Amendment. They wanted the cabinet to pull him from office and then spend the next 6 months making hay about that. Which, be careful what you wish for. If you make Kamala Harris president, she suddenly becomes the incumbent president, right? And all the trappings of the office that come with that when running for reelection. And listen, I'm a purist in that form. I believe you don't put the presidential seal out on the lectern when you're out there campaigning for office. And some presidents have, run afoul. In fact, I believe we had a GOP convention on the Rose Garden on the White House lawn, did we not, in 2020? I thought that was kind of... But then again, we were in the pandemic. Okay. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit. I really wanted to talk about... I love that I coined this phrase. A czar is born. There has been this narrative of late to turn the Kamala Harris role in our immigration situation into a weakness for her on the right. Remember, we had the emergency meeting, the emergency oversight hearing to look into Kamala Harris as the border czar. Fact is, she was never actually called the border czar by the Biden administration. What she was, and I've talked about this on this show a lot, not enough, honestly. And I don't. In fact, I'm one of the few that's actually even brought this to anyone's attention. I would love to go back if I had the time today to pull back the date that I started talking about root causation of migration from Central America, notably the Northern Triangle. That is what Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, had been tasked with. I'm going to read to you some from a CBS piece. And again, you know me. I put this in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Let me get you the author's name. Camilo Montoya Galvez giving us this 2 days ago, the facts about Kamala Harris' role in immigration in the Biden administration. This is something that needs to get some oxygen, needs some air. Following President Biden's decision to abandon his reelection campaign and endorse Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee for president, Harris' role in immigration has come under scrutiny. Soon after Mr. Biden's announcement, Republicans sought to blame Harris for the Biden administration's woes at the U.S.-Mexico border, where American officials have reported record levels of illegal crossings in the past 3 years. In a phone conversation with CBS News on Saturday, former President Donald Trump said Harris presided over the worst border ever as borders are, a title her Republican detractors often give her. Harris is all but certain to face even more criticism over the Biden administration's record on immigration, one of American voters' top concerns ahead of the election. And Harris does have an immigration-related role in the Biden White House, but her responsibilities on the issue are often mischaracterized because that's what the right likes to do. They often mischaracterize. And by the way, I can sit here and talk to you about the border numbers. The border numbers, by the way, are a little bit of a mischaracterization as well. And I'll do this. Can I do this in the show notes? I think I can. I think I can add this graphic. I'll try and do this in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com that show you that the trajectory that Donald Trump's numbers were heading to weren't all that different. His numbers were going up. Remember now, he was in office beginning 2017. And we started to see a spike in immigration at our southern border in 2019, to the point that those numbers were approaching 2022's numbers, of course, before then, in 2019. What happened? What stopped that flow of immigration at our southern border? Well, it wasn't anything Donald Trump was doing. Obviously, the cruelty is the point. The show them how nasty we can be had its effect in the first 3 years, but the numbers were still growing. What happened was a little thing called the pandemic, COVID-19. COVID-19 had a greater effect on immigration, migration, legal or otherwise, at our southern border, had a greater effect than anything Donald Trump was doing. So I say all that to say that when I continue reading from this article, I'm going to point out that Kamala Harris' role in immigration wasn't to be a border czar. This piece from CBS News points out exactly what Harris' immigration role was. In March 2021, when the Biden administration faced the early stages of an influx in illegal crossings at the U.S. southern border, Mr. Biden tasked Harris with leading the administration's diplomatic campaign to address the root causes. You've heard me say this before, root causation of migration. The root causes of migration from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Remember the names of those three countries, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, including poverty, corruption, and violence. The region, known as Central America's Northern Triangle, has been one of the main sources of migration to the U.S.-Mexico border over the past decade. Harris was not asked to be the administration's border czar or to oversee immigration policy and enforcement at the U.S.-Mexico border. That has mainly been the responsibilities of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and his department, which oversees the country's main three immigration agencies, including Customs and Border Protection. In reality, the only role close to that of a border czar under the Biden administration, according to this article, was held for only a few months by Roberta Jacobson, a longtime diplomat who served as coordinator for the southwest border until April of 2021. In her immigration role, Harris' main line of work has focused on convincing companies to invest in Central America and promoting democracy and development there through diplomacy. In March of this year, the White House announced Harris had secured a commitment from the private sector to invest over $5 billion to promote economic opportunities and reduce violence in the region. Efforts to reduce immigration by improving conditions in migrants' home countries have always been viewed as a long-term strategy, meaning it's going to take a while to see the results, Americans, by U.S. officials. In its root causes framework, the Biden administration conceded the, quote, systemic change it envisions for Central America will take time to achieve. So the question is, what sort of results have they achieved? Give me just a minute, going to take a quick break, come back, and we'll talk about what those achievements have been thus far. And yes, there have been notable differences even at our southern border. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio. So here we are, the final 12 minutes or so of the show, and this is not normally how you don't care. Especially if you listen via podcast, it just goes 44 and a half minutes. That's how much time I'm allotted each weekday on the America One Radio app and at AmericaOneRadio.com. I usually go a little bit longer in my third segment, but I'm under the clock today. I'm running sort of at a hard time here and trying to get this show done almost in real time today. I normally pre-produce well in advance. Unfortunately, today I had some stuff to do this morning, so it's got me kind of running a little bit behind. Anyway, we were talking about what Kamala Harris' role was when it comes to, with regards to our immigration policy. And it wasn't that she was a border czar, although that's what they're trying to label her as, because they can point to numbers of illegal crossings at the southern border and go, well, Kamala Harris did a poor job. Actually, no, she didn't. Where she was tasked to get work done, we see results, tangible results. My theory being, liberals, progressives, hear me out. Kamala Harris' work with regards to immigration is actually a plus. I'm going back to this piece that was written a few days ago, filed by a reporter with CBS News. Oh, hang on. I'm terrible with names. I forgot the name already. But this is a really good piece. Oh, here we go. It was Camilo Montoya Galvez writing about Kamala Harris's role on immigration within the Biden administration. Again, it goes to point out that her role wasn't to be a border czar. It had more to do with dealing with root causation. And again, you've heard me talk about this on this show if you've listened routinely. Months ago, I was saying this is something that the Biden-Harris administration should be talking about, their efforts to stem what's causing folks to come here, leaving their home countries, the destabilization of which we have a great, or I would say outsized role in, whether it's militarily or environmentally. climatologically, economically, when it comes to sanctioning countries, because we don't agree with whatever ism they've ascribed to, communism, socialism, too much of that, et cetera, and so on. It creates instabilities that make it tough for people to live in their home countries. And so when they leave, whether it's the economic instability or the environmental instability, the drug trade that we don't deal with enough here at home to curb. Universal health care would help with drug addiction recovery, I'm just saying. And so we fuel a drug trade in several home countries, of their home countries, that continue to exacerbate their migrating away for safety, for an opportunity, for their children. All right, back to Montoya Galvez article here. There are some legitimate questions about Harris' work on immigration. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, most non-Mexican migration to the U.S. southern border originated from the Northern Triangle, the countries we were talking about, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. In 2021, it made sense for the administration to focus on the root causes of migration in those countries. But migration flows have changed dramatically in recent years. Record numbers of migrants have been coming from places outside of Central America, including from countries like Cuba, Colombia, China, Ecuador, and Venezuela. In fiscal year 2023, for example, Border Patrol apprehensions of migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador made up 22% of all crossings during that time period. Hear me again. Fiscal year 2023, Border Patrol apprehensions from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, the countries that Vice President Kamala Harris was tasked with focusing on, made up 22% of all crossings during that time period. That's down 41% in fiscal year 2021. That's right. 22% in fiscal year 2023, but that's down from 41% in 2021, according to statistics from the government. On the flip side, however, the administration could point to the fact that illegal crossings along the U.S. southern border by migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador have decreased significantly every year since 2021. I'm going to read that to you again so that you understand what I'm saying. You understand the data here. 2023, apprehensions from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador were 22% of all crossings. But that's down from 41% in fiscal year 2021. Illegal crossings along the U.S. southern border by migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador have decreased significantly every year since 2021 from those three countries. The three countries that make up the Northern Triangle in Central America that Vice President Kamala Harris has been tasked with dealing with root causes of migration, I should say. Back to the article. While most of her critics have been Republicans, Harris' work on immigration has also garnered some criticism from the left. During a visit to Guatemala in June 2021, Harris told those intending to migrate, "Do not come." We've seen the clip, right? You've seen the viral video. "Do not come. Do not come," she repeats. That statement drew ire from some progressives and advocates for migrants. And apparently my cat in the background unhappy with it as well. Sorry, Dooley. As the second highest ranking member of the Biden administration, Harris will also likely face questions over the all-time levels of unlawful border crossings reported in 2021, 2022, 2023. Those crossings, however, have plunged this year, reaching a 3-year low in June after Mr. Biden issued an executive order banning most migrants from asylum. He did that, of course, after having to, because a bipartisan immigration policy was not going to be voted on after former President Donald Trump signaled to those on the right not to do so that they could reconvene this idea were he to be elected president, so that he could take credit for a bipartisan border deal that was actually ready to be signed by the current president of the United States in tandem with the work that he and his battery mate, that's a baseball term, he and his vice president had been working on, dealing with root causation at the southern border. Instead, what the president has had to do, without beefing up Border Patrol, which that bill would have done, without beefing up the judicial process, putting more judges in courtrooms and lawyers to help deal with the onslaught of asylum seekers at our southern border. What he wanted to do with that bipartisan border deal was to help with enforcement, help with the judicial process that is completely overburdened by the numbers, and by the way, having to use numbers set in the 1960s, not even amended since then to show for population growth. It'd be like saying, as we can point out right now, well, the minimum wage is set at $7.25, which was, I think, passed in 2010, but wasn't tied to an inflationary measure, or else it would probably be around $13 now, right? The 1960s numbers that border enforcement and our immigration courts have to adhere to are largely set in place in the 1960s and 1970s and haven't changed since then. But the global population has, as has the effects of our economic and militaristic and even climatological effects on those countries, have grown exponentially. The Biden-Harris administration has been trying to work on immigration from several flanks, with enforcement by Border Patrol, with a strengthening of the immigration courts. They would have liked to have seen an adjustment in numbers to reflect modern-day realities. And despite the fact that the right has tried to paint Vice President Kamala Harris as a border czar, that she never was. And that's a fact. She never was a border czar. No matter who wants to say otherwise, no matter what link somebody wants to pull up. I think it was Eric Erickson yesterday. Well, Axios called her a border czar back then. And, well, okay. Who's Axios? Is Axios on the Biden-Harris administration? Is Axios an elected official? No, Axios is just another journalistic source that propped up in the information age. They're not Biden-Harris. They're not Joe Biden. They're not executive branch. They're not Karine Jean-Pierre. They're not White House officials. They're just Axios, who repeated a term or used a term that I'm sure someone heard from somewhere else. Kamala Harris was never a border czar. What Kamala Harris was the principal liaison for the Biden-Harris efforts to deal with root causes of migration from Central America. And in her case, notably, the Northern Triangle, where in fiscal year 2023, I'm going back to this article because I'm going to read this again. It bears repeating. In fiscal year 2023, Border Patrol apprehensions of migrants from those three countries made up 22% of all crossings, but that's down from 41% in 2021. The administration could point to the fact that illegal crossings along the U.S. southern border by migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador have decreased significantly every year since 2021. So what's the lesson to be learned here? It turns out walls and snarling dogs and barbed wire in the water, go to hell, Texas. Seriously. Governor Abbott, go to hell. Hiding barbed wire in the water. What a jackass. Just an asshole thing to do. It turns out that instead of doing that addressing root causes of migration at the source of the country, it turns out that actually addresses illegal immigration at our southern border without us having to be the unwelcome assholes that I'm pretty sure I may be an atheist, but I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. I went to a lot of Sunday school. I read a lot of Bible verses. I heard a lot about this fellow Jesus. Sounds like a really cool guy, socialist, who would be welcoming to the immigrants, who implored us to welcome the immigrant, the visitor. It just sounds to me like what Biden-Harris has been doing actually works if given a chance. It's going to do it for today's Ron Show. I will include that article. Please share it amongst yourselves, your friends, make the case yourself as you can. And share the show, please, by all means. The Ron Show on all the major podcast platforms and available weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com. Replays 5 to 6 p.m. weekdays. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Have a good one.